Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. In today's edition of the second rest day of the 24 Tour de France, we have a special guest. We have Dr. Dog, the team doctor from Team Astana at the 24 Tour de France. Now, I'll let Dr. Dog introduce himself real quickly, and then I'll give you guys a little bit of history of my time spent with Dog. Dog, welcome to the show. You're our very first guest on Beyond the Coverage and the Butterfly Effect of 4 years of video.
I presume that's an honor. I'm happy to meet you again, to see you again, Chris. I'm Dag van Elsen. I'm 33 years in professional cycling, of which I spent a few years together with Chris. This year I'm working with Team Astana Kazakhstan, and I was very happy to be a part of history again, because with Mark Cavendish we broke the record of Eddy Merckx of the most Tour de France victories in the history of the Tour de France. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for being on the show. It's going to be a new experience for myself, actually interviewing instead of just talking about bike racing. So we spent a ton of time together, and throughout our time we did Astana, we did Radio Shack, 5-6 years together, you and I, Dog, and we've of course went through my crash at the 2011 Tour de France when I knocked myself out with the concussion, and I woke up in the hospital bed just looking at your mug right next to me.
Yes, those were the days. I still remember it. And a couple of days ago, we had something similar. And I was thinking again of you, how much you repeated endless times the same question: where I'm at, what am I doing here? Can I go to the race tomorrow? I want to speak to my wife. You kept on repeating it. I spent all day next to your bed because I was so scared. We were in this, I don't know whether it was a museum or a hospital, but it was somewhere in France. And yeah, I still remember it. And still a lot of things changed. So a couple of years ago, they started with real guidelines regarding to concussion in the Tour, where normally somebody who lost conscious cannot start again for the next 24 hours. But sometimes there's a lot of pressure on riders and also on the doctors to keep going, but it never ends well.
But it's always the doctor's job, of course, to look after the patient first, right? That's the first rule of thumb for all doctors: is the patient. The rule of the doctors is patients first, the health of the rider, the health of the athlete, and then, of course, after that, you start looking at the team and you start going down the list. But the most important is always going to be the health of the rider, correct?
Yes. As you know me, I'm first a doctor, then a sports doctor, and then a team doctor. And only once in my career I had to say, or the rider goes home for his health, or I go home.
Right. It's a difficult mix between the two, but as long as the health of the rider is good, it also benefits the team in the long run too. Now, do you remember right after we left the hospital, when we checked out of the hospital, you and I went over to McDonald's on the way out of the hospital. And so
Am I allowed to confirm that?
Yes, you're allowed.
We're live, Chris.
This is my show. We're allowed to confirm it. Everybody on my show, of course, all the fans on the Chesterfieldian fans here of the Butterfly Effect and Beyond the Coverage, they all know I won the Vuelta a España in 2013, eating a lot of McDonald's 12, 13 nights before each of the mountain stages. So today with the fans, we really want to discuss about the nutrition, how much it's changed from the 90s and then all the way coming in to the 2020 Tour de France here, where it's such a big difference. In my day in 97, I remember with FDJ, of riders just completely starving themselves and going out on 6-hour rides and trying not to eat, and then coming back after a 6-hour ride and being told that you shouldn't eat after racing and training for a 2-hour period afterwards. But things have changed, right?
Yes. And unfortunately, that was really the fact. That was really the fact. And luckily, it's not like this anymore. Now, we do advise our riders to do some empty stomach rides to improve fat uses. But on the other hand, we do advise them also to eat a lot to prepare their guts when they have to ride really when they have to produce a lot of power. So it's always a balance between optimizing the fat burning, and optimizing sugar burning and sugar uptake. And I do remember some rider that was drinking Coke and eating Snickers back in the days, but I don't remember his name anymore. Um, but nowadays, everything is monitored very closely. So when they go, for example, for very long rides, long slow distance rides, they eat like 30 grams of carbs an hour, which equals more or less 1 bar, depending on the brand, 1 bar or one gel, up to four portions, 220 grams or even more during heavy exercise. So we really try to optimize all engines that run on fat and on carbohydrates, and then you have the perfect mix. I remember also very well back in the days when we were going to Milan San Remo, that I said to the guys, you have to eat a lot in the first hours, so you have enough carbohydrates in the end if you have to climb the Poggio. But now, with really very good scientific research, we found out that if you eat a lot, you spend a lot. So it's like when you earn a lot of money, you spend a lot of money. So now we advise them in the beginning of Milan San Remo to eat only 30 grams combined with ketones, because the ketones help you to save your glycogen for a couple of hours, and then you still have the glycogen for the money time when it matters.
And,
And
and so if we were comparing, say, stage 5 of this year's Tour de France that Mark Cavendish broke Eddie Merckx's record, and we're comparing his calorie intake for that stage 5 before he was explosive and won the stage at the end of that day, to, say, yesterday's stage 15 of the Tour de France, where they went over 5 category climbs, the amount of calories that Cavendish would be taking in for the stage that he won would even be less than the amount of calories that he finished almost last and made the time cut on yesterday's fabulous stage 15. But the calorie difference between the two stages has to be massive, where they're just riding, where the sprinters are
it's
just riding back there in the peloton, casually chatting for a lot of that stage, and then going into a stage 15 where they'd have to eat nonstop.
I guess it's almost half.
Almost half.
It's the big, yes, the difference is that big. And like yesterday's stage, I was used, as you know me, I was used to work for teams that ride for the GC, and we used to calculate how many kilometers from the top our leader could attack and stay in front. Now we have to calculate for each climb how much power the sprinters group have to push to be within the time limits, and the calculations are almost harder. And so I'm not gonna reveal that much details, but for example, we had to weigh our sprinters, so we could tell on the first climb you have to push X watt per kilo. I'm not gonna tell you how
Right.
much. On the second climb, and then you will be able to make the time cut. But if you push X watt per kilo, you have to eat a lot and keep on eating these carbs. And
It
so you have to, your gut also needs to be trained for that.
And that eating, after you've gotten trained for it and gotten used to it, if you were to come up short on, say, the stage 15, okay, today's a rest day, so they can make up for stage 15. But if it's stage 14 and you're going into stage 15 and they were to get those calories wrong, you might make that time cut on stage 14, but then you can't make up the amount of lost calories in the muscle and the lost recovery that you've had to get ready for the next stage 15 if you didn't eat enough on 14.
That's very correct. So we have a very good recovery protocol where we first have our carbs, and then we have carbs for the first hour, carbs the second hour.
And this is,
We also
excuse me,
combine
this
it
is,
with ketones.
Doug, this is just directly after the race that you're talking about.
We take, as soon as they cross the finish line, they take their
Mm-hmm.
ketones, the key four, and then they wait a little bit. Then, of course, they drink some water, of course, also to flush down the taste of the
It's
ketones.
bad, right? When
And
they're
it's worse
chugging
if you drink
this.
sparkling water. It's worse if you drink sparkling water. Then the rider throws a bottle at your head, um, because then the flavor comes back. But so they have first their ketones, then they have their first carbohydrate drink, and then they have solid carbohydrate, which they weigh according to the energy spent and to their body weight, and combined with protein. So it's very strict. Before, in your times, we ate a lot at the hotel. Now we eat a lot at the finish line and at the bus. So that's a big
And
difference.
so just
Because at the end of the day, you cannot eat too much calories or you gain weight, and that's also not the goal in the ground
right,
work.
of course. If you're adding kilos, next thing you know, your watts per kilo are going to have to go up even more if you're actually weighing heavier. So
Mm.
to be clear to the fans watching the show right now, Ketone Aid does sponsor the channel, and that's why we have Dog on, because they sponsor the Stana team. So we wanted a little inside knowledge about what the ketone does for the body and such to get the riders ready. Dog, you and I talked before we came on the air a bit about it, and we had discussed that the ketone was originally thought about as a different kind of fuel. So you have food that burns. So as we had discussed, it was kind of like normal gasoline, and then originally they thought it was like nitrogen that they'd put into the body, and then it was a different kind of fuel for the rider or the professional athlete or the amateur athlete at home to find another way of burning like you would like a nitrogen that you're putting in your race car. But since then, you guys have come to realize that it's the recovery benefits that are the best. But also, I've noticed too that when the riders are drinking it, each bottle has 120 calories in there too. So every time when they're drinking it on the bike or after the bike, they're also getting more calories than, say, back in the day when I was with FDJ, or even when you and I were working together. When I would get back into the bus, I was finding those calories through more pure sugars of Coca-Cola and Snickers, as we've discussed. But now with Ketone Aid and with the KE4 bottle and stuff, they've found different ways to have it go cleaner into the body. Is what the recovery benefit is without so much. It's a burn in another way, correct?
Yes, it's an alternative fuel. It's not an additional fuel.
Okay.
So it's not that you can push 400 watts, and if you drink ketones, you can push 440. That's what we initially hoped, everybody.
Right.
But it does help you to recover faster. We don't know all mechanisms yet. We have lots of theories. I like to keep it
Right.
simple, as we talked before the show. So ketones is something that you produce when you have no food. So it makes you more alert because you need to look for food. And it makes you also absorb your food faster. So that's what they see now in ultra runners when they take their food together with a little bit of ketones. It seems, we're not sure yet, we're never 100% sure in medicine. It seems that they absorb their carbohydrates faster. So, and which makes sense.
So it,
This is how it makes you more alert. It makes you use your sugar smarter, makes you save your sugars, your carbohydrates for when it's really hard. That's what we know now. The complete mechanism on recovery we don't know yet, to be honest. At least I don't know yet. What I do observe is that when we use ketones as recovery at altitude, they lose easier fat. That's fact. That these are things we measure. So we use also the ketones of ketonate at altitude after training and before sleep, and we see that fat decreases and lean body mass
and of
increases.
course your
So
studies are
that's
on the Stana team and of your riders throughout. You've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, you've been working with teams. You've been at the Tour de France for 20 years. You and I worked
yes,
together
yes,
for
yes.
6 years. So all of your studies, which is what I've always been lost on when I'm reading studies. A lot of times I think they're misleading because they're not taking professional athletes. They're taking people that have nine to
Mhm.
five jobs that are sitting on the couch that all of a sudden are into a study. Now they become more focused. And so they didn't have perfect training to begin with. They weren't elite athletes at the top of their form that were taking, we'll say, ketone aid at that moment when they're at the top of their form. we'll say when we see those studies done with normal people at home, they've been sitting on the couch. Now they get super motivated to get into a study. They're training better. They're more focused. So, of course, their level is always going to increase.
Yes.
Versus you have the benefit, since you're working with the Astana
Mm.
riders and they're already professional athletes at or near their best form that they've been in their entire life. Once you start working with them and changing their diet, changing with their food, whether if it's adding ketone aid in there or if it's just changing the amount of pasta you're giving them for dinner each night, you're seeing a rider and working with a rider that's already at his best. He's already been training at his maximum level.
Yes.
So then your studies could actually be more accurate than anything that we would read outside in a clinical study that they believe is 100% fact in their clinical study. And I don't argue that in a clinical study you could see an athlete get better, or you could see an average athlete get much better as they focus more, becoming more professional. But you're taking them already at their top. So in order for you as the team doctor of Astana to see improvement, everything has to be working at that moment, whether if it's going to altitude, whether if it's giving a half a plate of pasta or a full plate of pasta, whether if it's after a 2-hour ride or after a 6-hour ride. The amount of different ingredients that's thrown into a professional athlete to figure out the science perfectly is very complex, right?
Yes. But I always, like I say, the patient is always right. That's one of my sayings, as you know. And the riders, they feel what
Right.
they feel, and they keep asking for the
Okay.
ketones. Initially, it was a hype, and everybody wanted it, also because it was expensive. So they thought it's expensive, must be good. It tastes bad, so it must be good. But once they felt the effect on their body, they keep asking for it.
Right. Which is the
So
biggest sign,
as
is that the athletes,
which is for me is enough. I don't need any fancy paper with double blind, and because the studies they always do, as you say, are with volunteers, healthy volunteers, or students that are not really volunteers but have to participate. um, but here we have real athletes, and they keep asking for it, and it's also some are really good with it in the race, others not. And this is because it blocks the use of carbohydrates. And this is very different from person to person.
Yeah, I've seen that many
So,
times throughout my
mm,
career, though. As the viewers know, I've was professional for 25 years, and I'd seen where we're on the bus, certain riders prefer a certain diet that works for them. Others prefer different. Some guys had tried to go
mm,
vegan, and it was such a rarity to see riders that were vegan racing at the professional level because it just seemed like they couldn't find the right amount of calories to get them through the race. When I've seen riders try to switch over, I've seen other riders do like say at 80% vegan and a really small level of meat and stuff like that, been successful and stuff. But once you see each rider, their diet and what works for them is always interesting to see who's grabbing what kind of food off the shelf there on the team bus before they're getting ready to start a stage of the Tour de France, and what you're packing in your pockets. Of course, during the days when I was doing it, I would come over with my own race food and have a ton of my own race food, and I'd always
yes,
have right out
half
of
a
the suitcase,
suitcase.
right? You remember it was crazy. I had 2 suitcases, and so I'd fly over to the race with 2 suitcases, one with my race gear, and one was like a travel on that you could store and bring with you inside the plane itself, so carry-on bag, and it was packed with all of my own race food and my own junk food, and just set and ready to go. And then when I arrived at the start of the races and the soigneur set out all the food and whatever we were supplied with each different team, it always changed, right? But then I would pick through what I liked and what I've used and was experienced with using through the team. Because back in the day, remember in the 90s, we were just getting the little pastries that were folded up in the tinfoil,
Yeah,
right? That was the science,
yeah.
was the pastries that they got from the dessert trays in the morning. They
Belgium
took them from the
bakery.
bakery, the dessert tray in the morning at the hotels or the night before when we had them for
Yeah.
dinner, right? And they would cut them up, they'd wrap them up in tinfoil. And even to this day, I still don't mind having one or two of those if it's in my back pocket to take with me. But for the most part, excuse me, for the most part, yeah, the science has gotten just better and better to where all the food that you're feeding the athletes is that much more helpful and that much more direct use for the riders. But I still see even along with the ketones, I still see the Coca-Cola has never left the professional peloton either.
No.
Right, it shouldn't.
There's nothing wrong with one Coca-Cola.
If nothing else, it's good for the head, right?
You should get another
yeah, right.
sponsor, Chris.
If nothing else, it's very good for the head.
Yeah, there's one thing about the food. Now we're also doing DNA tests to see which food is better for you or how you can absorb food better. We're starting sometimes with microbiome tests because food is absorbed by the gut, and sometimes you need to intervene there. So there's a lot of science and a lot of high-tech science into it
And
at
that
the moment.
study,
And I have the feeling we're just at the start
I
of it.
believe we're still at the start of everything too. I really think it's always evolving and always going along. I still remember how much more calories I had throughout my career when I was racing compared to a lot of my teammates. And now when we see the studies, and of course here talking with you this morning and such, where we see that they have learned to really do 200 carbs per hour when it's a race like yesterday, stage 14 and 15 of the 24 Tour de France, versus like stage 5, you would cut that in half, as you were saying, versus if you were in training, you might even cut that again and take another percentage off of that, because training's not even going to be as intense as stage 5 Mark Cavendish's stage victory was, except for that last hour when the racing's full gas the whole day. So I believe it's always evolving. It always has. Ever since, remember the chart, the 4 main food groups chart? I mean, even that's starting to change, right? So everything's definitely changing big time.
Yeah.
Dog, it's been a pleasure to have you on the channel. I appreciate you taking the time off out of your second rest day of the 24 Tour de France to come on Beyond the Coverage and be our first guest here.
It's my pleasure, and was happy to see you again. And I hope to speak
my
soon
time
again.
always spent with you was a pleasure, Dog. I appreciate the many years with Radio Shack and Astana and stuff that we'd spent together. Time at the Tour de France together. Time at the hospital when I woke up and you were the first mug that I saw after my concussion in the 2011 Tour de France. I appreciate you not allowing me to start that next stage of the Tour de France, as we stopped off at McDonald's instead before you dropped me off at Alain Galopin's place.
I forgot that
I remember it. We
Very
went
selective
straight to
memory.
McDonald's. You told me, you said, okay, I'm taking you straight to McDonald's and that's it. You're not going to start the Tour de France. And I could not understand why you weren't allowing me to start the Tour de France. But I appreciate it now after I saw it. You made the right call 100%. Every experience I've had since that day has changed after that crash. And I appreciate you sending me home safely back to Bend, Oregon. And, of course, I married my wife later that same year. Thanks.
Take care.
I will
Say
do. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, bye.
Wait, I give from the other bottle. Is my case? Water?
I gave to Jess. We have some fireworks.
Yeah, we have floats, we have